And good morning, everyone, and welcome to the CalTAP Mental Health and Suicide Prevention webinar. My name is Kirk Eller. I am a CalTAP training coordinator, and I'd like to welcome you here for this webinar. These topics that we're going to be discussing today on mental health awareness and suicide prevention, they are very sensitive topics to a lot of people, and we want to thank you for joining us. So on behalf of CalVet and the CalTAP team, thank you for joining us. We have a wonderful webinar for you today. We have Robert Storr from US Vets. He's the director of US Vets here, and he's going to be providing some slides and information for mental health awareness and suicide prevention. I'll be starting off and give you a little bit of overview on the CalVet and the CalTAP program. And then my colleague, Anthony Rodriguez, who is the Los Angeles County, LA area link or local area internet, the link provider for LA County. Excuse me, my apologies. And then we're going to follow up at the end with some Q&A. And then speaking about the Q&A, if you open up the Q&A tab on the bottom of your toolbar, you can ask questions in the Q&A throughout this webinar, and we will address them in the Q&A tab, or we will wait till the very end. Of course, during Mr. Storr's presentation, he will not be able to answer any questions while he's doing his presentation, so we will follow up afterwards at the end, okay? And then my colleague, Michael Monk, will be putting some informational resources in the chat feature, our resource book, and then link map, and some other informational resources as well. So if you open the chat, you can see those and download some of that information as well. So again, my name is Kirk Eller, and I am a Marine Corps veteran. I served from 1986 to 1990 as a helicopter crew chief. And then I came to work with CalVet here in 2019. And I am very passionate about providing these informational resources to veterans on these subjects. So we'll get started here on briefly what the CalTAP program is. It was designed to inform and connect veterans of all eras of their earned federal and state benefits, and then provide continued support and with a continuum of care as those needs change over time. How we do that is with our core curriculum, our education, employment, and entrepreneurship pathways. There's a fifth pathway for service providers. If you're interested in doing service or business with veterans, there's a training provided from service providers. We do like to ask that you stay connected with CalTAP, and then there's a couple options to do that. Provide your non-DoD email to our CalTAP web email address at calvet.ca.gov. And then you can also register for My CalVet on CalVet's homepage, and I can show you that in a minute how to do it. And then, of course, you can add us on our social media pages. There's a QR code there to the right for all of our social media. And you can like us on Facebook, Instagram, and we also have a YouTube channel, which we do record all of our webinars and post them on our YouTube channel. This webinar itself is being recorded, and it will be uploaded at a later date. So once our comms department gets the recording, they will upload it to our YouTube channel. You can attend webinars like this, and then of course fill out a survey like the link that's provided there and the QR code for this individual webinar. So the CalTAP program, or California Transitional Assistance Program, this is our home portal for the CalTAP. And you can see the pathways that I mentioned there before, the core curriculum, education, employment, and entrepreneurship. If you go to the bottom of the page that's highlighted, you can actually access our archived webinars. There's a list of webinars that we've recorded over the past 2.5 years, and you can access those for future references. This webinar will also be loaded in that archive once it's recorded and loaded there. So I'd like to talk about your California-specific benefits. The California-specific benefits cover a wide range of areas, from the college tuition fee waiver, the veteran designation on your driver's license, as well as the motor vehicle registration fee waiver. You can receive hunting and fishing license at reduced fees and a no-cost state park pass. And you may be eligible for a disabled veteran property tax exemption or business license exemption. We have different divisions through CalVet, like our home loans division, our women's division, and minority division. And then we have Calvet homes for long-term care, and we have 3 Calvet cemeteries throughout the state. I'm using a condensed version of our California benefits today so that we can provide Robert Storr more time to provide information on the mental health and suicide prevention. So if you have any questions about these benefits and want to learn more, you can go to our website. You can ask a question in the chat or the Q&A portion, or you can email me directly. My contact will be here at the end of this slide presentation. So I apologize for the condensed version, but we want to give Robert Storr more time to focus on the topic of the day. This is our veteran resource book. My colleague, Michael Monk, should have provided this in the chat for you to download. You can download the PDF or the link to our website and then download from there. And I do encourage you to download this to a mobile device so that you have it with you wherever you go, and then you're accessible for other resources. Other benefits other websites you should be aware of is the VA. You can access healthcare, disability, and records and education benefits. They've actually changed now to the My VA portal, which is going to be utilized all in one portal for you to access their information and manage your care. This is my website or my email address. You can contact me directly at this email if you have any questions about those California benefits. And then there's also an 800 number, and we do pride ourselves for a live person answering these phones. And you can call the 800 number and a person will assist you there. Now I'm going to turn it over to our local interagency network coordinator for LA, which is Mr. Anthony Rodriguez. Thank you, Anthony. And he's going to give you some information on what his roles and responsibilities are. Thanks, Anthony.
You're welcome. Thank you. And good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today on this mental health topic. I want to say that before I get into what I have to get into, I just want to tell you what a treat it is to have Robert Storr speaking to all of you. Robert is a renowned expert in this topic and is very involved in helping all of you. So it's a pleasure to be a part of this, webinar. Now back to what I do. I'm the local interagency network coordinator for the Los Angeles and Ventura County area. Next slide, please. What that means is that my job is to become an expert in all the local benefits, be that city, county, state, federal, nonprofit, and in a variety of areas in mental health, employment, benefits, basically you name it, and that's the role of the link. You can see that on the map that's shown, the statewide map, that there's 8 of us statewide. I have the area that's turquoise toward the bottom with those 2 counties that I mentioned, but we have someone in Orange County, in the San Diego area, in Imperial County. We have another individual that covers the Inland Empire all the way up to the Mono County area, someone in Central Valley, in the Central Valley area, covering many counties, the Central Coast, the Bay Area, and Northern California. The link position is a unique position, and I've never heard of another position like this anywhere within all the services that veterans may receive, be it federal, state, county, you name it. Nothing like this. And it's truly really a pleasure to be here. But what it provides for you is you can literally call someone in any part of the state, and they will be experts on where you can go to receive the benefits in almost virtually any area that you need. So it's a true honor to be a part of this, and there's a lot of expertise in this area. So next page. As I mentioned, my job is to provide outreach to service members. So just this week, I did a presentation over at Navy Base Ventura County, but I'm also presenting, all of us present many times at National Guard locations, reserve locations. We're often presenting with groups like CHP or the police departments because there's so many veteran employees. We make referrals. We also assist with local emergencies. If there was a fire, as is common in California, we would be contacted and we'd be initiated to be a part of the Cal OES, Office of Emergency Services for the state of California in our specific area. And our goal would be to provide information for veterans in particular during that emergency. We also provide leadership and advocacy during our roles in various groups, collaboratives, and so on that we're a part of. Next page. So as I mentioned, I connect you to a lot of different areas. On the employment side, it could be EDD, it could be one of several non-government agencies like US Vets or JVS. The America's Job Center is a great place to start for looking for work. On the state's benefit side, I work very closely with our county veteran service offices. There's one in every county, and other CalVet members. And I have a lot of contacts within the VA, that is in the Long Beach VA and the LA VA, also in the downtown LA VA, Sepulveda, and basically all the locations, vet centers and so forth. So we're here to help. Anything we can do, please give us a call. Next page. And here's my contact information. As I mentioned, ready to go to help you. Even if you're not in the area that I work, I'll definitely direct you to who you can go to so you can get the help you seek. Back to you, Kirk. Or Robert.
Thank you, Anthony. Okay, and now we're going to turn it over to Robert. And Robert Storr is with US Vets. He's the director of US Vets Bob Hope Patriotic Call. And he's going to be giving you this wonderful presentation on mental health awareness and suicide prevention. So, Mr. Storr, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Kirk, and thank you, Anthony. It is such a pleasure to be here and a privilege to continue to work with CalVet and CalTAP, who is leading the way in the state of California to take better care of our veterans, especially in the area of mental health and suicide prevention. I just want to thank Keith Boylan and also Roberto Herrera for their leadership and support of this process as we begin to move further along the continuum of taking care of our veteran community. You all are amazing partners. And Anthony Rodriguez, I was at a training yesterday and someone said, Anthony Rodriguez, that man is everywhere. So appreciate you operating all throughout this huge area to take care of linking our people, our community to the CalTAP program and services. So just a little bit about me. I am the executive director of US Vets at Bob Hope Patriotic Call. Privileged, I'm entering almost my 8th year here, about the time I met Anthony in Bob Hope Patriotic Call. And just want to give you a short synopsis of how I got here. About 12 years ago, I was working in a hospital and a suicide prevention educator came to the hospital to share some information. One of my clinicians that was working for me down in Long Beach said, we are going to have this amazing training. And I've been a marriage, family, child therapist for over 30 years. And I said, that's great. I was a manager. I was supervising an amazing staff of clinicians, social workers, case managers, and nurse case managers in a home health program. And I said, that's great. You all go to the training. I'm going to go back to my desk and finish up all of the wonderful administrative duties that come along with management positions. That was a fateful mistake because at the time, suicide I thought was something that happened over there to somebody else, to some other community that I was not a part of. And it was a short-sighted observation because 6 months later, I would lose my best friend to suicide. And had I been in the training, perhaps I could have seen some of the signs, perhaps not. But the reality is, the reason I share that story is to really make us aware that suicide is everywhere and can happen to anyone. And the unfortunate thing, due to the stigma that people who suffer from suicidal thoughts and desires have, we often don't know. I was at a training yesterday in Los Angeles County with the Department of Mental Health for a veteran suicide review team to begin to look at what does the risk factors, what do the risk factors look like that contribute to someone's inevitable death by suicide. And sitting next to a woman veteran who'd been in the Navy for 8 years and graduated from the Naval Academy and told me, you don't have any idea how many of us have lost service members and our brothers and sisters to suicide. So this is an important training and I appreciate the opportunity, next slide, to be here. And I hope that this will leave you with some information. I'm going to do my best to get through this information pretty quickly because I have a lot to share, but I want to make some time to make this personal to you. So please, as I speak and questions come up in your own personal life for yourself or for others, please feel free to put those in the Q&A or write them down so that we can discuss them at the end. If statistics are right, 60% of us, 60% of those of you in the audience today have lost someone to suicide, and that's shocking. And in the veteran community, I'm sure it is much higher. A quick story about US Vets. We're the largest nonprofit in the United States working with homeless veterans. We have these 11 different sites. What's unique about my role at Bob Hope Patriotic Hall, and I feel so privileged and view it sort of as a God move that I've ended up there, is we're the only site without residential facilities, which means my main focus is on prevention and early intervention, using my mental health background as well as my background in case management and social services to put together programs like Outside the Wire, a mental health program, community college campuses, and veteran resource centers. Our women vets on point, because the suicide rate has climbed among our women veterans as well. Career development for employment, a vet to peer, which is a training program to get veterans who are interested in doing peer advocacy work trained and employed, and an aftercare, which is to support people who've been recently housed. Next slide. So it was sort of fortuitous that when I got here, I recognized that I would take my background after I lost my friend to suicide. About 2 years after a protracted grief period, I made a decision to recharter my life, to enter the area of suicide as a profession. And I went to work for the Suicide Prevention Center in D.D. Hirsch. Next slide. And I made it my mission to learn everything I could. So let me tell you a little bit about the history of suicide prevention. Go ahead and advance through here, Kirk. What we know about suicide prevention is it began right here in Los Angeles. And you can go ahead and continue to advance. And it began actually within the veteran community after World War II. And these three veterans that you'll see under the WHO tab are responsible for beginning the suicide prevention movement. Specifically, Norman Farborough and Edmund Schneidman were doing research. They were writing letters to widows of World War II casualties, and along the way, they came across a number of suicides. Next slide. And so they went to work in the West LA VA, and they asked the coroner's office to create a study in which they wanted to investigate suicide notes to see if they could tell the difference between manufactured or made up notes and real notes. And last bullet point here, what they found out is they could. And the reason they could was this last factor, that people who wanted to die by suicide actually did not want to die, but were struggling to live. Now, this is a very important point, because before then we thought that somebody who died by suicide, if they wanted to die, was inevitable. There was nothing we could do. When this new perspective came out, this notion of, next slide, this notion of ambivalence, that people really were dying that did not want to die, we knew we could intervene and save lives. And that was the beginning of the first suicide center in the United States. Currently, there are over 160 suicide prevention crisis lines operating. Go ahead and advance through this. What we do know is there are over 12 million people that think about suicide annually. Now you see there's only 1.3 million that lead to 47,000, which is far too many suicides. But what that tells you is that not everybody that thinks about suicide or even tries to die by suicide is inevitably going to end up dying by suicide. So again, we have an intervention possibility. Keep moving forward there, Kirk. The startling factor is we lose almost 15% of those suicides are veterans in the veteran community. The reason this is important, and that next point about firearms, is the majority, about 60% of the suicides are due to firearms. Go ahead and advance through. The reality is we want to know, as I mentioned earlier, anybody can be at risk, but what it means for us is we want to zero in on people who are high risk. I liken this to heart disease. If I go to my doctor and I'm overweight, which pandemic has sort of supported in me, and I have high cholesterol and high blood pressure, and I have a history of heart disease, what is my doctor going to do? Every time I see my doctor, they're going to check my cholesterol, my blood pressure, and they're going to see how I'm doing. And they're going to advise me on a good diet, good exercise, and ways to take care of myself. Well, wouldn't it be remarkable if we could zero in on a community that potentially was at a higher risk for suicide and talk to them every time they went into the doctor to see a mental health professional to assess how they were feeling, if they were having thoughts, if those thoughts were progressing to a dangerous place of desire and possibly a capability or an intent to die? We'd be able to prevent most of our suicides. So we have to get there. Those of you listening today, thank you for being here. I hope you join all of us in this effort to really make a difference. Next slide. And be one of the people who can begin to destigmatize. So next slide. What makes a person suicidal? I wish I could give you that answer. As I mentioned prior to this and most of the presentations I make, I go back through the latest research. We still don't know. We do know there are several factors. There's not one single cause, but there are numerous causes. Oftentimes you'll see in the news someone died by suicide because they had a particular relationship crisis or issue. The reality is it's a set of complex factors, probably some biochemical factors in our makeup, just like why do some people get high cholesterol, high blood pressure? Because that's the hereditary neurological or physiological system they came down with, probably similar to suicide. Just some people are more predisposed to have that as a higher risk factor. Go ahead and work all the way through. So what this means is we need to look at what those risk factors are, make sure we identify them. And if we know it's in our veteran community and certain members of our community are going to be at higher risk, then we know we have to look out for all of our brothers and sisters. And we have to look out because they're not going to go to their commanding officer. They're not going to necessarily go to the VA. They might not even call the 988 VA crisis line to talk about it. We might be the only one that has that information. So we have to have the courage to say, hey, I was in a suicide prevention training. Have you ever had thoughts? Or I'm assuming you have had thoughts because you're in our community. Have you ever been in danger of dying by suicide? And I'll tell you, if we look at those risk factors, we can also look at how to protect people. Next slide. So let me tell you a little bit about that as we move through that. Take a look at these risk factors for just a second to summarize. If someone has had an attempt, if they, and go ahead and keep running through that, if they have a mental health issue, which a good majority, substance abuse, a common way to cope. And for some people, again, their biochemistry makes it a problem. And exposure to trauma, sometimes that's a combat veteran. Sometimes that's just a veteran who's been in a bit of a crisis situation. That last point in blue, a crisis situation. If you have these factors, now look, that's a circle, that's a group of factors, and you enter into a crisis. This is important. If someone enters into an interpersonal family crisis, a financial crisis, a housing crisis, trouble with school, trouble with managing their mood or their temper, that may mean that we need to intervene. So we need to keep an eye on that. And thank you for putting in CalTAP. The new crisis line number is now a 3-digit number, 988. And if you press the number 1, you will get the veteran crisis line specifically, which can connect you to VA services. Does not mean you need to press 1. If you simply want to talk to a crisis line member, you can dial 988 without pressing it, and they will be happy to talk to anybody, especially our veteran community. Next slide. So let me move you through this quickly because I'm going to keep an eye on my time here. How does that risk reach a crisis? Go ahead and advance through this as well, Kirk. The reality is we have desire, sort of in green, capability, and then the last one we have is intent. Desire, many people have thoughts and have often, even thought, well, I wish I were dead, or I want to be dead. Now, that's usually a passing thought for most people, but it moves into capability, or if it moves into capability and now that thought is, well, how would I do that? Or capability, meaning I've had an attempt in the past. An attempt in the past makes me more capable, more likely to have an attempt in the future. Not for everybody, but for some people. But the last part is I have those two. If I have the intent, if I have really the desire to die and I'm choosing to die, which means I really think, my life is over, I can't find the solution. Go ahead and hit the last one. That could lead to a crisis. And next slide. So what are we going to do to make sure that we evaluate that? Well, let's look at what it's like to be a suicidal person. If I were a suicidal person, and I'm fortunate, being a suicide loss survivor, I've had thoughts of suicide. Now, the interesting thing is I don't have those other risk factors, and therefore I'm not most likely to die by suicide. So thoughts for me are just thoughts. Sometimes they're a symptom of a depression or a bad day or whatever, because suicide was never in my mind before losing someone to suicide. All of a sudden, for those of you who are suicide loss survivors, that's not an unusual thing to have thoughts. Thoughts in and of themselves aren't a problem. However, if you reach a crisis and you're in an immense amount of pain and you have some of those other predisposing factors, in fact, we think neurologically people who die by suicide have less apt ability to make decisions under stress or solve problems, or sometimes have low impulse control. And that becomes then dangerous. So forward into the next slide. What does that mean? The brain does a funny thing when we're under stress or crisis. It becomes constricted. That black area are all of the options in our life. If you live anywhere in the United States, there are thousands, millions of options of careers and relationships, places to live, things to do. But when you're in the middle of a crisis and you're trying to figure it out, and you can probably relate to this if you've had a bad day, you start thinking in a sort of cascading way. Oh my gosh, I had a altercation with a colleague or a coworker or a friend. That person's not going to like me. In fact, most people are struggling with me, or maybe I'm just not a good person, or maybe, I'm not really able to communicate or have interpersonal. If I can't have interpersonal relationships, how am I going to hold down that job? If I can't hold that job, what about my rent? And how am I going to afford my rent? I'm living paycheck. And if I can't afford my rent, I'm going to end up, and your mind does crazy things. Your mind is doing something we call emotional congruence. It's looking for a solution as to why you are not feeling good. And it's presenting options, but those options aren't the reality. There are thousands of options around us in terms of what we can do. But in the midst of a crisis, we can't figure those out. Next slide. So what do? We have to really work with somebody to look at these three areas. If someone has significant depression or manic is when you usually feel like you're Superman, you can do anything, which of course is not realistic, or you're suffering from a lot of anxiety. If your friend, colleague starts to withdraw or does reckless things or is agitated, the example that I can give about my friend, he loved motorcycles, got into a motorcycle accident, decided he wanted to do rodeo, did rodeo work, got gored by a steer and ended up in the hospital. That man, and I turned to my colleague and said, "What's going on with this guy?" And my colleague said he's suicidal. I didn't understand at the time that he was engaging in reckless behavior. Maybe it's more drug use, maybe it's driving faster, or more alcohol use. Maybe the person's more agitated. That last one is important as well. There's a myth out there that people who die by suicide, like I said, there's nothing you can do. And in fact, if they say it out loud, it means that, they really don't want to die. Quite the opposite is true. People that die by suicide are trying to talk to us most of the time. The majority of people who die indicate that they're trying to tell us that they're in trouble, but they're so embarrassed. When I worked with people who survived attempt, I would ask them, "Did you call the crisis line?" And they would tell me no. And I would say, "Well, what would you not call the crisis line?" Well, I was ashamed. I was embarrassed. I didn't know what they would think of me. Well, in the military, what are we taught? We're taught that we should always pull ourselves up, that you should handle it, that you should handle it on your own, that you should be self-sufficient. So we have to reach out. We have to make a decision to be able to reach out. Those of you on the line today, those of you listening or listening to this at a different time, keep in mind that you may be the only one that says that to your friend or has the courage to see a person in trouble and ask them if they're feeling suicidal. Next slide. And if they tell you they are, there are things we can do. So having gone through the warning signs, again, look at feelings, go ahead and advance through this. Depression, mania, anxiety, look at behaviors, usually feelings, behaviors. Someone withdraw more, suddenly becomes more agitated, reckless, or listen for statements. If someone's feeling hopeless, telling you they don't feel like they can go on. Next slide. So those are some of what we call invitations now, invitations for help. Warning signs, sometimes we think, oh, that means stay away. Now let's look at that as an invitation. When someone's feeling hopeless, again, their anxiety, or they're suddenly having a lot of trouble sleeping, their mood swings, they get angry at you for no reason, they're engaging in risky activities or increasing their alcohol or drug use, or they're withdrawing, please reach out at that point. Be the one that says, "Hey, something's going on with you. Can we talk about it?" You don't have to walk up to them and say, "Are you thinking of killing yourself?" at the beginning, but you can say, "What's going on?" And that's actually how the crisis line is answered 24/7. Next slide. So aside from warning signs, you got to look at these particular risks in the moment. I don't know if we can get that slide to go all the way through. There you go. Keep going. We look at the desire, as I mentioned earlier. If someone talks about the desire, are you thinking of killing yourself? And again, in and of itself might not necessarily be a bad thing, but moving through that, next point, you want to look at the capability. Has somebody have a history of a suicide attempt? Have they gotten as far as thinking about a plan or how they would die. And lastly, that intent. Everybody who calls the crisis line throughout is going to get a risk assessment. That is, at the beginning of the call, they're going to say, so you called, what's going on? Are you thinking about killing yourself? And if someone says yes, which the majority of people will, they're going to say, on a scale of 1 to 5, how likely are you to actually ask? What's your intent? Are you just thinking about it, having thoughts? Or are you really planning on killing yourself, and you really have gone as far to think about how you would do it, and maybe you have the pills there or you have your gun out? How dangerous is this for you? Now, I want to tell you something that's really important here. So I want you to listen to this for a minute. Probably 97% of those 100,000 calls that come into LA, one of the largest crisis centers in the United States, are de-escalated and the person does not die. When I do training and I go to various social service agencies, I often say, what's your procedure if someone tells you they want to kill themselves? Well, I dial 911. You dial 911? I dial 911 and the police come out and the police take them to the hospital. Well, you missed a great opportunity to really help that person by finding out these three things. Is this just desire, capability, or do you really have the intent? Are you really in danger? If they are, on a scale of 4 or 5, as a therapist, I could almost always, well, no, I will say always, bring down somebody. And again, on the Suicide Prevention Center with paraprofessionals, people who weren't therapists, they could do the same. Now, that's not an expectation on those of you who are listening. You may just want to get that person on the phone. You may just want to direct them to the crisis line. You may want to call it for them, because you may not be able to mitigate the risk, but the risk can be mitigated if we can talk about it. Next slide. So let's talk briefly about what we would do, but remember this one fact. Those of you listening, and those of you who have friends that you've lost, or family members that you're concerned about, or colleagues, or brothers and sisters that are either serving or have served, remember that people who are struggling to live. They're struggling to stay alive. They feel like they want to die because they feel like there's no way out. But the reality is they really want to stick around. And if we can help them identify the pain, and I'm going to show you how to do that real quickly, then oftentimes we can save their lives. Next slide. But everybody needs to know. And how would you approach somebody? Go ahead and hit this all the way through, Kirk. So again, you'd ask that question. That's the key. Could I remain calm? And the most important thing I want to talk about all of this is listening. Are you able to listen to someone's reason why they don't want to be here without judging? The great thing about being a therapist for 30 years, and it only took me about 28 of those years to get here, is I can listen now. I can listen without judgment. I can listen about it's not my business responsibility or even decision on whether I want to intrude. It's my decision to be here, to listen and to help that person. I was working with a suicidal person who said to me the other day, you know what you therapists need to know? That you don't need to fix this, but in fact that you need to listen to what's happening and help us figure out or understand what we can do about it. So the most difficult thing is to remain calm, but you can do it with practice. And then listen is not just about, oh, are you thinking of killing yourself? Yes, you are. Oh, okay. Well, then have you thought about, no, listen is, oh my gosh, I want to invite you to tell me really how tough your life is right now. I want to take a minute to stop. We're also busy spinning from one thing to the next, trying to figure out where I have to go, what I have to do, that oftentimes we're not there for one another. We only need 5 things to live. If you've heard me speak before, you know we need food, we need air, we need water, we need shelter. The last thing is strokes. All of us, everybody on this call in the world needs strokes. We need the ability to be heard. We need the ability to have someone witness our life. We need the ability to connect. We need to share our story. And oftentimes it's crazy. If I can just share my story, that takes the power out of it. But if you can't listen, then I can't let go, because nobody can hear me, and I will continue to repeat or stay stuck. And while you listen, an interesting thing happens. You begin to develop rapport, that connection I'm talking about. And if you listen closely, you will hear information about that ambivalence, the reason the person wants to die, the financial crisis or the relationship issue, or the things that aren't working in their life, or the pain they've had as a kid or the pain they have as an adult. You'll hear all of that. And if you can listen, you don't have to resolve it. You don't have to come up with the answer. In fact, after the 30 years of doing this, I realized I don't have your answer, nor could I. I haven't lived your life. I haven't tried all the things you've tried to figure it out. I don't know what works for you or what doesn't. And it would be foolish for me to waste your time and suggest things without listening to you and you telling me what works and doesn't work, because you would remember that tunnel slide? You would remember, because I would be illuminating all of those options that you forgot about, and I would be pulling you out of that crisis that you're in. And once I understood those options, you would be able to understand those options. And of those options, you would remember, hopefully, the reason you want to stay alive, and you would possibly come up with the solutions. That can be done oftentimes in a 40 to 45 minute, if not 50-minute call. So please remember that. And I want to tell you a little secret. By doing that, you actually clarify your thinking as well. So by learning to listen, you actually begin to understand your own inner world and what you're experiencing. Next slide. So I'm going to try to move through these last few and open this up with questions. I hope you've had some questions. Remember this, when you're talking to someone who's suicide, don't jump to, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't think about that, or that's a permanent solution to a temporary problem, because you know what? That's not listening. That's telling someone they don't have permission for their thoughts. And I don't know if you've ever been told not to think about something. What are you going to do? You're going to think about it. The reality is they're already thinking about it. So don't tell people they can't. I hope that I'm listening to someone that they never do it, but I'm not going to tell them they can't, because it does no use. But I'm going to listen to that. If I listen to that without interrupting that, then I'll hear again the reason they want to stay alive. Go ahead and move through this one. So managing a conversation means reminding them that they're still here. And by listening to that, I'll be able to identify the reasons, or what we call buffers, the reasons somebody wants to stay alive. Because there are reasons, like I mentioned in that tunnel slide, they're all around us. I've just forgotten in the moment of my crisis. And if you stop me at number one and tell me I can't think about it, or you fail to remind me that I'm still here, I won't be able to identify the reasons I'm still here. But if you listen to the reasons why I don't want to be here, you'll hear the reasons I want to be here. Go ahead and move all the way through that. So if you don't hear them, you can ask the person, tell me, have you ever thought about something else? Not have you thought about, how you would fix that relationship by finding another person or doing this. No, just tell me what you've thought about. What's works? What doesn't work? I talk to people all the time as a therapist as well. And one of the things I'll tell them at the very end is, tell me what I did that was good for you, that helped you. Tell me what I did that wasn't good. And a lot of times I'll hear, don't talk, don't talk so much, because it interrupts my thinking, my ability to come up with my solutions. That last one, safety planning and resources, is really about helping someone anticipate a crisis and write it down so that they know what they would do in the middle of it when their thinking becomes constricted. Next slide. I think we're almost done here. Remember these few things, kind of tips, and then I'll turn it over for questions. Listen, 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 listen. Ask directly if they think about killing themselves. Uncover that ambivalence. What's the reason you're still here? Express empathy. When I was a young therapist, I might say something like, you're thinking of killing yourself. And then I'd say, now tell me how, without saying, that must be awful. Your life must be very rough. I'm so sorry to hear you're going through that. It took me a long time to learn those things. So if you can learn that faster, congratulations. And you will discover the protective factors. What are those? Those are the factors, my pet, the future I have to look forward to, the relationship with my friends and family members that I've forgotten about, the fact that I love to go to the ocean and take walks, whatever it is that keeps us going in this crazy world. We need to be reminded, and then discuss ways to stay safe, including an access issue, like where to put your gun or how to store your gun safely, not to take it away necessarily, but to put it in a place or put a picture on top of it that reminds you of why you're still alive. Next slide. I think we're almost done here. Again, here's the things we know. Everybody's having difficult life issues, and some people are having trouble solving them. So if you can give them the space to problem solve. Most of us have been isolated for a long period, except those of you who were fortunate, and maybe in some cases unfortunate, to stay stuck in with your kids the last couple of years. We need to be connected. Remember, food, air, water, shelter, strokes, mental health issues. There's wonderful treatment available all around us. We need to find more good qualified therapists, or get connected if you haven't been. Chronic stress, please find a way to remember to do self-care, to take care of yourself, to build up your resilience by making sure you have good self-care. In crisis intervention, if it is a crisis, you may not be the person that may be connecting to that 988 or to reach the Veterans Line, the 988+1. I think we're to our last slide here, and then I'll open up for any questions. How do you help a suicidal person? Ask that person what's going on. And in that conversation, go through that risk assessment I spoke about. Have you been thinking about killing yourself? The majority of therapists, physicians don't like to ask that question because they're not sure what to do. It's not a responsibility to save a life. We can't do that, but we can help a person remember why they want to stay alive if we're willing to reach out and be there with them in that very scary moment and make it safe for them to get through that. Because remember, they're not wanting to die. They're wanting you to open up a way to remind them the reason they want to still be here. So I want to thank you for having the courage to sit and listen today about all that information. I hope that is beneficial for you. At this point, I want to open it up to any questions. And if you do have a question that you don't feel comfortable asking, if you do want to email me at our store at usvets.org, you can feel free to do that. Somewhere in the subject line, mention regarding suicide prevention presentation or regarding suicide prevention. The last thing I'm going to tell you about 988, if you are worried about friends or family members or your brothers and sisters that are veterans or in the active duty or the reserve or the National Guard, you can also call 988. 988 with the number 1 to reach the Veterans Crisis Line is not just for individuals in crisis. It's also for those of us who may be concerned and don't know what to do. So I have somebody who's talked about suicide. I don't know if they really are suicidal, or I'm not sure what the next step is. They can guide you to resources. They can guide you on ways you can talk to the person, or they can just listen to you about your concern so that you'll be able to come up with your own solution. So thank you so much for your attention. Thank you again, Kirk, Anthony, my friends at CalTAP and CalVet, for all the incredible work you do with our veteran community, for your continued public health approach to suicide prevention, where you give an opportunity for people to really connect and hear. And if there are any questions, I'm here.
Thank you, Robert. We appreciate that. That was a really good message, and there's some really good takeaways in there for, helping people. And we don't have any questions as of now, but please feel free if you do have a question. We'll stay on a couple more minutes here. It's only 10:42, so we will be answering anything if you do want to put anything in the Q&A tab. And then, like Robert said, if you have a personal question that you would like to address, his contact information is right here as well if you want to do that personally for a private message. Or you can reach out to any one of us as well. We're here as well and can direct you to some of those resources that Robert was mentioning if you needs to. Robert, I do like that comment about the photo. I remember at the Leadership Summit last weekend, Lisa Kearney from the VA mentioned if you have a gun and a firearm, to put the crisis line on the outside of the door, and then put the family and your pictures of your loved ones on the door as well, or inside where your firearm is safely and securely located and locked. To just have that second thought of, hey, what are the ramifications of that happening if I were to go to that next step? So I kind of got that as a really nice takeaway, especially the crisis line on your gun safe. I mean, that's right there in your face with your pictures of your loved ones and your wife and your spouse and your children and your grandchildren. So, I mean, I thought that was a really good message. So we have a question coming in. So I'm going to let Michael kind of chime in here and take over since he's the Q&A. So I don't want to step on his toes. So I'll let him, I'm going to mute my speakers here so it doesn't get any feedback. So hold on a second. Okay. So
Thanks, Kirk. And yeah, thank you for the comment. I think the idea of hope.
All right, it looks like we have one question here that came in the chat, and it says, what should a person do when their family members do not recognize the depression in a person?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you for that. I think the tricky thing about depression, and quite frankly, I've been a therapist for a long time, as you heard earlier, and prior to going through grief, I didn't understand really what a depression was. So depression is not sadness. It's not just feeling blue. It's actually a disabling mental health condition where you are sort of in that constricted space we saw earlier with the tunnel. In other words, you're losing your sense of pleasure, which is called anhedonia. You're losing your sense of clarity on what are options. And it's actually probably a physiological change in your brain that needs medical attention. It's very tricky. People don't like to be made aware that they have any health issue, much less a mental health issue. But there's a tool I call a validation, and it's an important tool. It means your ability to recognize something with somebody without being intrusive. So I never tell anybody, I made the mistake actually of doing that once, that you're depressed or, you're bipolar, which is a manic depressed kind of mood swing issue, or because you're a veteran or law enforcement, you have PTSD, because not all veterans do, not all law enforcement. But if I saw somebody in my family suffering, I think the compassionate, wonderful thing to do, if you are conscious enough to notice that, is to pull in one more C, compassion, consciousness, and courageous. Again, people often think, we had this question come up yesterday, won't someone be angry at me if I ask them, or ask them if they're suicidal? Remember, people are walking around hurting, waiting for the opportunity to talk. So instead of asking, what I tell people with the validation tool is to say something like, I sense something's going on with you, or I'm aware, or I'm recognizing that you're struggling with some things. I'm not a clinician, and even as a clinician, I might not want to diagnose you as depressed, but I'm worried. So I sense, I'm picking up by the way you're acting, or by the fact that you're not here more often, or not able to converse very easily, or withdrawing. I'm sensing something's wrong, and I'm worried about you. I'm worried that you may be depressed, you could use it, or I'm just worried about you. So rather than go to the diagnosis, open up the conversation to connect. Can you tell me what's going on? Now, there's an important point about what I just shared. It's not just you're depressed, or I feel like you're depressed. I can't feel your feelings. I can sense them, because I'm paying attention to you and I care about you. But I'm not going to diagnose or label you, but I want to open up a conversation. And I might even ask you for permission. Is it okay to talk about this? I will do that in therapy, even with clients. When I pick up something, I'll say, do you want to talk about that? Client-centered therapy is about paying attention to what the client wants to do, not what I think they need to do. Same thing with our family and friends, paying attention to them and having the compassion, the consciousness, and then the courage to tell them what you're experiencing, and then open up the opportunity for them to connect, and then see if they want to connect. Oftentimes they'll say no, which is frustrating, but you can add one more thing. Okay, if that changes, I just want you to know I'm here. I'm open. If you want to come to me some other time, if you change your mind, or if it does come up, just know that I'm thinking, might be just they're having a bad day and not really depressed. It might be they're angry about something. But you've signaled them you're available. And if you want to follow up, you can follow up later. I hope that helps.
Okay, I don't see any more questions. Thank you. That's a really good insight, Robert. We appreciate your feedback and your assessment of that question. So, we really understand this is a difficult topic. So, like we mentioned before, if you do have questions privately that you want to address, you can reach out to any one of us, and we can kind of like go a little deeper into that. So, and with that being said, we don't have any more questions. So I think we'll move on to our webinar survey. If you do, please, we do ask that you take a couple of minutes. We value your feedback for our webinars. We use that information to continually improve and provide resources and informational topics that you are looking for. So there's a link here for the SurveyMonkey, and then there's also the QR code that you can use your phone to establish that connection to the SurveyMonkey. So please do take time to take that feedback seriously. We do have some upcoming webinars. Since September is Suicide Prevention Month. We do have some other topics that are in line with that, with the PTSD coping strategies coming up next week. And then, of course, the 28th and 29th, we have CSU San Bernardino is going to be hosting Navigating VA Disability Claims virtually on the 28th and 29th. And then the 29th for Skyline College is going to have claims and compensation in that whole application process. And I see we do have another question popped in. Can you add the link to the chat, please? The link to the Survey Monkey. Yes. I will kind of copy this. Pardon my, oops, I'm not going to be able to edit it. Do you have the link for the Survey Monkey? Yeah, Michael's going to put the link for the Survey Monkey into the chat for the survey. So, and I will put it up here again so that you can have access to the QR code one more time in case you need it. Sorry about that one. Be patient here. It's just a couple of minutes. He's getting it copied. Okay, I think Michael does have the link put into the chat for the survey. And with that being said, we were going to go ahead and sign off. It's a little early. It's 10:52. We do want to thank everybody for joining us today for this important webinar. I would like to thank Robert Storr again from US Vets and my colleague Anthony from the LA Link, and Michael Monk, of course, for running the back end and the Q&A and putting the chat information in there. On behalf of everyone here from CalVet, thank you for your service, and thank you for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you again in one of our future webinars. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you later.